I've never, in my whole professional career, written a speech, let alone delivered a written speech. But this moment was really important. This is the moment when we say, and when I say we, I mean Steve Edwards and I say, Sons of Safety, it's in your hands now. It's a massive moment for us, and I want to read a speech that I'll make available. And where's my card? Here we go. And it will run animation-wise through the screen. So is it just the green button? Okay. So thank you, Emma, for those very powerful and extraordinary words. Thank you. I'm going to come back to what you said at the end. I want to, before I respond to Emma, I want to absolutely underline that I stand here representing both myself and my dear friend and colleague, Steve Edwards. This is absolutely important because it's a fact that without Steve's 16 years' work in this department, none of us, not one of us, and certainly not me, would be in this room right now. We are all in Steve's debt. So now I'm speaking for Steve and myself. So speaking for Steve and myself, I acknowledge that we know that all of us in this country stand on Aboriginal land. I want to state very clearly that I know Perth is first and foremost Noongar Whadjuk land, and declare my gratitude to the Noongar people, leaders past and present, for constantly nourishing the traditions and the dreaming of this land and welcoming us all who live here. That spirit of generosity is extraordinary. Thank you. I travel the world often, more often than I like sometimes, and it's an absolute privilege for me to be able to live in a country that is home to probably the oldest human culture on the planet. The archaeologists are now saying we've got DNA records that go back past anything that they've found in Africa. Probably the Aboriginal culture is the oldest culture on the planet. For me as a white fella born here, it's both humbling, daunting and inspiring to live my life, work, play, love and raise my own children. And my son Jeremy is up the back right now. I'm very thankful for you being here, Jeremy. But to raise my own sons, my own children on Aboriginal land. Okay, from that acknowledgement, I want to say what everyone knows. The care and raising of children is sacred business. The care and raising of children is sacred business. Every culture, everywhere in the world knows that. Yeah. The big problem we are all struggling with in our work, whether it's in CPFS or any child protection system, is the fact that Western children's services systems operate from the youngest tradition of childcare on the planet. The youngest culture of childcare on the planet is what informs our Western child protection systems. There's a misfit here. Our Western children's services systems perpetuate a hierarchical system of knowledge, privilege and power that disempowers all of us working inside those agencies. Inside those agencies, we all become anxious in our work and in our relationships. And that's before we start talking to the most disenfranchised people in our communities and in our societies. While Western culture and its left brain excellence offers amazing knowledges and amazing opportunities, and its systems, the problem is its systems are almost singularly unsuited to dealing with sacred tasks. our Western systems almost singularly unsuited to doing sacred tasks. We can't even say the word sacred. Yeah. The most sacred task of all, raising, loving and passing on culture to our children. And that's what we're wrestling with. The reality is, however, that our Western child protection systems are our society's primary vehicle to responding to the needs of our most vulnerable children. So you can make that critique that I just made, but you cannot walk away from those systems because our most vulnerable children depend on them. And we have to stay in them, and we have to wrestle with them. And any traditional person anywhere in the world will tell you they feel like they're doing a deal with the devil working in our white fellow Western systems. And they, when they say that, that's the acid test and of the truth of what I'm saying. At the core of the problem, no, I'm going to leave that, you can read that in the speech. Why do I say all this? I say it because I am clear, and so is Steve, that he and I do not in any way own the signs of safety. I say all this because Steve and I are absolutely clear. He and I do not own the signs of safety. Steve and I somehow received the gift and the opportunity of drawing together our professional and personal experiences to create the signs of safety. We did that at a privileged time in Australian history, both of us having come of age in the 70s, when Gough Whitlam declared to Vincent Lingiari, Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Yes? We were young men growing up at that time, when Australia started to declare itself to the world. So we're not some derivative culture of Europe or the North America. Kiwis did the same thing. You know, I was inspired. One of my closest friends in the 70s was Tim Winton. When I watched Tim over at Curtin suddenly crank out a book that won the Premier's Award, I went, what the? I couldn't, when I was 19 reading that book, I couldn't even understand that book. I didn't know how this dag from Albany, the Church of Christ, could generate that book, then go on to write Cloud Street at 28. But what I damn well knew was that he was stuffing his stuff and taking it out on the world stage. You know? And if he could do it, I thought, well, why can't some of the others of us? Yeah. So, where am I in my speech? I went off literature. Steve and I were led and inspired in our white fellow journey by a spirit who drew us together and then led us to draw together a vision of our best ideas for doing child protection differently. We were determined to work together with anyone we could, anyone we possibly could, to build a vision. And most particularly, we were determined to stand alongside the practitioners who were doing the direct work, knocking on doors, removing children, taking kids from placements that are broken down, who are living the experience, the trauma and the exhilaration of child protection work. We were also always determined to always listen to the children and the parents on the receiving end, and to make sure they were the final arbiters of whether we were doing any good. We were also determined to always acknowledge failure and vulnerability, because it's impossible to get this work right. I'm quoting from the Eileen Munro songbook. It is impossible to get this work right. We've got to let go of that terrorising that we do of ourselves and each other. Anybody who introduces the word right into the conversation needs to step outside and shake themselves before they come back in. To use my mother-in-law's term, when somebody farts. Because that's what that's like. When you say get it right, or ask the right question, or write the right danger statement or something, it's that stupid. You can't get this work right. Because it's impossible to get the work right in exactly the same way that it's impossible to get your parenting right. Can't be done. The fact is, you always just do your best. Knowing that, we were inspired by a spirit of gratitude and a theology of blessing. We're inspired by a spirit of gratitude and a theology of blessing. We set out on our journey wrapping ourselves in a Western therapeutic tradition of forensically paying attention to human vision and purpose. Always building hope for that vision building, paying attention and drawing on anything of what's working. That's the engine room. I speak, of course, of the solution-focused brief therapy tradition brought to us by our colleagues Steve DeShazer, Isaac Ginberg and Eve Lipchick. In 1988, and soon to be, Steve and I got together and we were soon to be accompanied by those international colleagues. We set out with two young men's hopes of drawing together ideas. And like a mother magpie building a nest, we drew together the approach from local knowledges and lived experience. It's always our touchstone. We were hoping to maybe shift the whitefellow system just a little, to do something different, to better help practitioners, to be able to actually work alongside children, parents, families, neighbours and natural networks, to get the children listened to, loved and cared for a little better. I and Steve are the co-creators of the Science of Safety, and that's an unbelievable privilege. I'm deeply grateful, as is Steve, for the opportunity we've had to co-create this approach. Particularly for all the learning, richness, challenge, trauma, and as Steve would say, fun that is brought to our lives along the way. I want to say, though, very clearly that both of us know that while we're the creators, the co-creators, as I said a minute ago, we very clearly know we are not the owners of the approach. In exactly the same way that Aboriginal peoples everywhere in the world know that they are not the owners of the land, for Steve and I, these ideas, this approach was gifted to us. What we're saying is this: I stand here like Gough pouring red sand into Vincent's hand, saying if this approach was ever useful, it always was and always will belong to the practitioners. If this approach is ever useful in any way, it always was and always will belong to the practitioners. The approach is dead in a book. In that book we wrote, it's dead in there. When you create a record of it, in a presentation, in a film, in anything, it's dead. Don't get me wrong, we have to create the record. That's creating theory. Theory is simply recording, creating a story about what we should do. We have to do that because we have to leave a record for those that will come after us and those who want to learn from what we did. So often, practice that works is never documented. It's probably been my most passionate drive. Where am I? I think that's where we are. I'll lose my eyesight's a little bit out. So, where are we? So what's written or recorded in some sort of what is written and what's recorded is always only some sort of approximation of the lived experience of what passes between the practitioners and the people on the receiving end. Please excuse me for the sporting metaphor, for those of you who hate that. Greg Chappell said a long time ago, we're only as good as our next hunt. What we mean by this is the science of safety approach is only alive when it's owned by practitioners and makes a difference for children, parents, families and everyone with any natural connection with the kids. We want to be very clear about this. It's the people doing the direct work who the science of safety approach belongs to, always was, always will be. Right now, my business, Resolutions, controls the approach internationally. Having said that, it's important to say here that earlier in the year I signed over my own, Steve's and Resolutions intellectual property rights for all of the work that we have done with CPFS in the last 8 years. signed over that ownership to CPFS. At its simplest, what that means is CPFS can define signs of safety however it wants. I will certainly seek to influence you and guide you, as Emma asked, but I don't and won't define what the department does or does not call signs of safety. It's not my role and it won't ever be. That's a vulnerable place for me as co-creator of this work. And I, of course, wonder what the hell will you do with our baby? I want you all to also know that while right now my business, Resolutions, controls the approach, that is only very temporary. The approach was never mine to own, so in 2020, the whole leadership in control of the science of safety approach and its intellectual property will be handed over to an international board of management. The most likely CEO of that international board will be Joke Wiggering from the Netherlands, who most of you know, who is now working full-time in the international science of safety community. That means after 2020, I can move on. I can perhaps pretend to be the wise old man of the field. I can establish the clinical service with the highest risk cases I've always wanted to lead. I can write all of the series of books that are backed up in my own head, heart and soul. So for Steve and I, we not only wonder what CPFs will do with it, but what the international community will do with it. In fact though, that's a really good place to be, because if child protection teaches us one thing, it's the wisdom of vulnerability. Since we can never get what we do right, since we're always carried pell-mell and anxiously into the next situation involving the most vulnerable children in our society, we are always in the business of we're always being taken to our next level of incompetence. We're always being pummeled and rolled over and made more vulnerable. If we relish that vulnerability, child protection work can transform us. Children's services work is rightly addictive because it always offers us a sacred path of personal, professional, organisational and social transformation. Precisely because it's always focused on the most iconic and sacred being in any culture, that of the vulnerable child. This is what life's like. Life's always a risk. Children do die. And kids in the worst circumstances also do thrive. We have to find the courage to work and live in that space. So, what I'm saying is no expert, whether it's me or Steve Edwards, Emma White or Mel Samuels, Professor Eileen Munro at LSE, or Professor Fiona Arney at U of South Australia. No department, university or institution controls what signs of safety is, full stop. The people who control what signs of safety is, to the extent that it is anything at all, the people who make it real were and always will be the practitioners who go use it with parents and children. I will probably, till I die, continue to throw all my personal energy. Yes, I know, and I'm going to finish this. Yeah. I will probably, till I die, continue to throw all my professional energy, vision and passion into the journey of building the science of safety and the community of professionals and agencies it belongs to. That has been my calling for many years. I want to thank so many people for the opportunity of giving this speech right now. If I started to do that, I wouldn't be finished till next week, so I'm not going to try and do that, because I think all of you want to get out of here in a little while. Before I make one critical thank you, I want to offer an apology. I want to apologise to anybody over the journey that has been offended by anything I have done or said. I've never set out to offend people. I've never set out to offend anyone in anything I've done. I throw everything into what I have into my work in a way that led my mother to call me the hound of heaven. That's what Emma was thanking me for. When you feel called, as I do, and driven to do your best, you sometimes also do and say stupid things. That's my experience of what it's like to live your life on the edge. That's why my symbol and my totem is the crow you see in my business. I want to say very clearly to anyone I have offended, anywhere, at any time, I welcome feedback from you. If you want to me to hear something I have done that has offended you. Anywhere, anytime. Yeah. Okay. Before I do close, I just want to offer one vote of thanks. Hang on. So in the spirit of gratitude, and because I can in no way thank everyone, I will follow Paul Kelly and let the part reflect the whole. I want to acknowledge one person to whom everyone in this room owes a debt. Terry, will you please stand up? Take a bow, and everybody, a round of applause. As Vincent said to Goff, after Goff had handed the sand into his hand, he said, "We're mates now." That was Vincent Mignari's simple response to Goff. To finish, I want to ask Emma to receive this copy of Steve and my book. What that means to us is that's us saying it's in your hands now. If you look in that copy of the book, it's to CPFS.
DCP's fine.
And it says, signs of safety, it's in your hands now. When Steve and I published that book, we held the unveiling of the book in 1999 at the Acknowledgement conference in the concert hall. It was crucial to us that we honoured all 17 of the West Australian practitioners whose work was in that book. Every one of those we gave a copy of the book to. So we gave a copy to Kay Benham. There's 3 people who are still in the department. We've got examples in that book. We gave a copy to Kay Benham. We gave a copy to Vanya Dupaz, but not for a couple of years later because she disappeared off the face of the map having a baby and we couldn't find where she was and nobody knew, but she did come back and we gave her a copy, and Andrea Nixon, if she's still in the room. All of those 3 have, as 17 others in Western Australia, examples. So I give this copy to Emma White now in her role as Director General. The Signs of Safety approach is Indigenous to this state, it's Indigenous to this department, and it's in your hands now. Thank you.